where you walk into, like the building where we worked, Big Rock, was a little ways down the road from the main house of Skywalker Ranch. You walk in, and in the lobby, they're like, "Oh, this is George's Klimt."
Oh my God.
And you're looking up and, yeah, no, it's an original Klimt just hanging there in the lobby. That's cool. There's that, and then there's the stuff like, Yoda is hanging out. We got a tour of the archives at one point. They took the writers for Clone Wars on tour of the archives. So you better bet that I have, a picture of me with R2-D2. And the Millennium Falcon. You see all the original costumes, all the original droids, all the matte paintings are hung up there. Oh my God. It's mind-blowing. And for somebody like me who, slept on Empire Strikes Back sheets.
Me too.
Right? Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. And, I had every action figure. My carrying case was stuffed full with more. They wanted me to buy more cases, and, I wouldn't. I would just stuff them all into the case that I had. It was my life. And so then to be hanging out at this place where you could go, stand next to the original R2-D2, that was mind-blowing for somebody like me. So that was pretty great.
Well, since obviously we've got Star Wars coming out and it's a huge deal, and the big obviously we know nothing, but the big controversy is whether we're going to use original characters, how far they're going to go through a trilogy and all of that. I'm curious, as far as writing goes, which did you prefer, writing for characters that were already established or creating new ones?
It's interesting. Both, because the new characters gave me a chance to, not me, gave us a chance, all the writers who went through the Clone Wars franchise. It was certainly a chance to put your own mark on the Star Wars universe, and that's a thrill. At the same time, I was writing dialogue for Obi-Wan Kenobi and for Yoda. Come on, that's amazing. Yeah. So there was definitely a thrill in both, and especially in the idea that our season sort of started showing the beginnings of darkness creeping into Anakin's life. That's the creation of Darth Vader. That's awesome. So I was thrilled. Really thrilled.
That's so cool. Now, if I don't ask you Firefly questions, I will possibly be shot.
Well, we don't want that.
No, and I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of Firefly. I mean, who isn't?
Who really? Isn't? Right.
Yeah, so that's getting involved in that. What was it like, and why do you think it's so popular. People are insane over it all these years later. Why do you think that is?
Well, it was a very good show.
It really was.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. It was such a precious gem, and too good for this world, I guess.
Yeah.
Which I never really understood, but
no one does.
No one does. Luckily, Joss Whedon's he's working some stuff. Yeah. Yeah. He's doing okay. I got involved because I was on Buffy, and a couple of us, Jane and me, I guess we were the ones who started the ball rolling. They just pulled a couple of us off to just get a couple of scripts going on Firefly before they had a full staff set up. So that was, again, one of those. I've had a lot of really great experiences in my career, a lot of really lucky breaks, and that was one of them. It was a science fiction epic set on a spaceship with this immense beating heart at the center of it, and these characters who were really good people. No matter what they were doing, It was really about a family on this ship, and I don't know. I think you can't go wrong with that as long as the story is well told, and it was. So it's one of those things where you're like, why didn't it last?
I know.
And I think we're all a little sad about that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, and it's great that there was a movie too, but it's one of those things where you never stop feeling heartbroken for that.
Well, what I find really remarkable is the depth of the heartbreak that continues now. What is it, 10 years later?
Oh, God.
Right? I know, which is terrifying in and of itself. But people haven't let it go.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks volumes, or it should anyway, to how committed audiences can be to stories well told, stories about characters that matter, and stories with heart. I think audiences will respond to that. They'll respond so much that 10 years after the one-season show goes off the air, we're still talking about it and we're still feeling the loss of it. So that should be a lesson to everybody programming TV.
Shouldn't it, though?
It should.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're all learning from the lesson, but I'm saying the lesson is there for them to take it if they'd like to.
Yeah. Well, actually, that brings me to another thing, because so many times, and not just with Joss's shows, but so many times, all shows that are sci-fi or fantasy related in some way are the ones that get the axe first.
Right.
And, I mean, is that a history with Nielsen ratings? Is it... What do you think it is? Do they just not get it?
I wish I knew. If I knew the answer to that, I'd probably be a lot richer than I am. I do think it's hard not to look at the landscape right now, right at this moment, and say it's not changing.
Yeah.
Because I think it is.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at something like Game of Thrones, which has captured, right, which has captured the imagination of audiences. Granted, maybe more fantasy than sci-fi, but the idea that there's something that's genre based that is getting some kind of mainstream attention. The fact that movies that are based on comic books are having this sort of renaissance right now. The fact that I'm working on a TV show about a comic book superhero.
So cool.
Right? It's awesome. And it's a hit. I think the world is changing, and I don't know if it's that audiences' taste has changed. I don't know if it's that we've found a way to broaden the appeal of these things. I'm not sure exactly why it's happening the way it is. I don't think you could look at something like Game of Thrones and say, oh, they've compromised, or that's too generic. I think they're telling that story. I think what really works about Game of Thrones, I know what works for me, as somebody who's not necessarily well-versed in the fantasy genre, it's my favorite show on the air. And I think the reason for that is that it's all about character.
Yeah.
That each of these characters is so well-defined and has such a clear goal. And the emotion is there. That's what draws me in. And, it's fun to see VFX, and it's fun to see big action set pieces. But the thing that's going to bring you back week after week on a TV show, it's the characters.
Yeah.
And I think that's why something like that works. I think Arrow is working because Oliver is such a compelling character, and because the people who populate his life are such compelling characters. I'd like to think that's probably what it is that's doing it. And also just that, people see that it's all cool, which it is.
Well, it's interesting talking about character, because I just spent yesterday being interviewed about women in comics and things like that, and female characters, and one of the things we were talking about was writing female characters as actual people instead of the girl in the series and all that. And Arrow has so many really cool female characters, flawed, not flawed. I mean, well, all flawed in a way, but
sure.
But and I think that's something that's been part of Joss's universe too. So, is there anything you want to say about female characters?
Well, it is really interesting to me that it's always been my point of view that the best way I'll interrupt myself again. When I first came to LA and I wrote, you have to write spec scripts to get yourself noticed. I wrote spec scripts where I wrote women who, in my mind, it wasn't that I was writing men and putting women's names on them, but it was more like I just wrote them as characters, as people.
Yeah.
They were flawed. I just didn't care that they were girls. They were just characters.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they could be informed by their experiences as women, but it didn't make them less than. It didn't make them weak. It certainly didn't mean that they ever had to be rescued.
Yeah.
Which is something that I feel is really important. I don't know if it's that attitude that helped me get the job on Buffy, or if it was just something that was reinforced by my experience on Buffy. But I know that when I was on Buffy, I felt like, well, of course, Joss's whole mandate, the whole reason why Buffy exists, is to show that not only is it acceptable for a woman to be strong and capable and self-sufficient and kick-ass, but that, in fact, guys will find that hot, and that it's an attractive quality. Not just guys finding it hot.
Yeah.
Women will find it hot too. Everybody will find it hot. It's one of those things that to me seemed at the time like, well, duh. And it's been interesting for me going on to other shows where that isn't necessarily as much a presence in the makeup of a particular show, and sort of finding myself going, oh, I guess I got kind of spoiled in my first job. Not everybody thinks that way, and I wish they would. I've been really lucky that I've been on a lot of shows where they do, and it's been interesting being on a couple of shows where they don't. And I often find myself yelling, oftentimes into the wind tunnel of but hey, why does she have to get bonked on the head for the 78th time this season?
Yeah.
How about if she kicks her way out of the scenario herself? One of the things that I loved about the show I was on before, Arrow, Warehouse 13, was that our women were very capable, very self-sufficient. Were not afraid of a fight. Were not afraid to express their opinions. They were just as strong and just as flawed as any male characters that exist on TV. I also love that the men could be emotional and insecure and nervous. It was so much about, on some level, breaking down the gender barriers. That, to me, it's one of the reasons why I often saw Warehouse 13 as sort of a descendant of Buffy.
Yeah.
Two totally different shows, but if you look, the DNA is still kind of there. And I wish that every show would take that attitude, and eventually I assume they will. I
hope so. It does seem to be sort of shifting in that direction.
Certainly.
And it seems to happen faster with sci-fi than it does with mainstream TV.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that...
Yeah.
I agree. I think that's really cool. I going back to Warehouse 13, it's on a related note, it's funny that you don't see a ton of gay action heroes.
Yeah.
We had one on Warehouse 13.
Yeah.
A guy who had a badge and carried a gun and was also gay. And I like the fact that it was sci-fi that took that step forward.
Yeah.
And so I really do feel like sci-fi has a rich tradition of exploring all kinds of social issues, all kinds of things that we face in our world, and presenting it in a way that's just a little bit different, so you get it in an entertaining way.
Caprica was big with that too.
It was. It really was.
And that was all kinds of, it was just like, these are all the different lifestyles that exist, and nobody seemed to care, and it was fascinating to watch, and you're like, well, why can't it just be like that?
Why can't it just say,
that'd be so nice.
So nice. I totally agree. And that was, Jane Espenson was running Caprica, and she was very clear that we weren't going to, there wasn't even, if I'm remembering this correctly, I don't believe the word gay was ever said, because Jane said it's not different. It's just another relationship, and that was the world that she wanted to present, and I was very happy to be on board with that. I thought it was a really cool thing.
Well, speaking of Jane, I did read in an interview that you did where you said you guys would be a great, Amazing Race partner, and I know you're kidding, but I would actually watch that.
So would I.
So just putting that out into the universe.
I'm glad you are. Now I'm afraid that someone's actually going to see that and put us on. That'd be terrifying. But yay.
But I would totally watch.
Thank you. Well, thank you, I think.
I think that'd be pretty awesome. And then, okay, let's talk a little bit about Dexter.
Sure.
Because that's a really, really different sort of, or at least from the visuals, it's different.
Yes.
What was the writer's room like compared to some of the other stuff that you've done?
Well, first of all, really nice. Like you would think on a show like that, we'd all be a group of crazy killers. And most of the people on that staff were not crazy killers.
Not murdering in the writer's room? That's good. That's a good thing.
Very, very few. A really great staff. It was, I think I was on season 1 of Dexter, and I think we all knew that we were creating something that was really special and different. So there was this very palpable sense of excitement. And at the same time, we were kind of finding our way with this thing and creating the roadmap. So it was a lot of, okay, what are we doing? But it was a great experience. It was really fun.
Well, finally, I have to ask you about comics, because as a comic writer, I really appreciate them, and I know you're involved in them, and it's interesting to see how many different ways TV shows, even when they're off the air, can continue, whether it's web series or comics or all of that.
Sure.
So what's the whole comic thing been like for you?
Well, okay, so I didn't grow up with comic books. It was never a thing, other than like the occasional Richie Rich or Archie, which was more my speed. But again, it goes back to Joss. You work on a Joss show, you're going to learn comic books.
Yeah.
That's part of the deal. So I got up to speed really fast. It's still not. It's not a second nature thing for me. It's not in my DNA. But I've been really fortunate that I've gotten to write a couple of issues Buffy season 8, Buffy season 9,